And the key point here is, when any brand does any market research, or you're testing, most of the time, you're asking people, you're getting people to rationalize their decisions. And often you're actually looking at the really the wrong driver for that behavioral change. So what this actually leads to is, from an AI perspective, is it's actually better to set up experiments and test and learn based on what actually happens in an actual behavioral situation, rather than rely on market research. So if your ad agencies do a lot of market research, they might be wasting their money. Okay. So if you look at behavioral science, one of the key areas which you might want to look at is cognitive biases. Has anyone heard of the term cognitive bias before? That's good. So these are the factors that actually influence your decision making, and they are true most of the time. And if you actually look online, you'll probably find this cognitive bias wheel, which will show you a whole load of factors that actually influence your decision-making process. And we can zoom in on one, so the confirmation bias. And this is, we tend to confirm information that enforces our existing beliefs. So knowing that that's how people react and behave, you can use this in your advertising. You can understand these cognitive biases and apply them to increase the effectiveness of your campaigns. But as we said before, if you actually ask people about this, does it have an impact, they'll probably tell you no. But when you start to do disciplined experimentation, testing some of these theories behind it, you start to see a big impact on the effectiveness of your campaign work. So, we mentioned a lot about advertising before, and success of advertising is often about, do people actually recall that information? And it's important to know that actually memory is very fluid. So if you're asked to replay that in your mind, you rethink that whole situation, and your memory of that event changes. It's the whole basis behind cognitive CBT and a whole load of memory methodologies. You can actually apply this and influence memory, and I've seen this applied, so you can actually change people's memories of events, such as this one, by how you replay that information. It's the same true with your advertising. Where it becomes really interesting is, this is, we mentioned about personalized experience. This is from an educational psychologist called Edgar Dale, and he looks at the amount of memory recall that people get based on how the information is presented to them. And the majority of brands I work with, I normally specialize in healthcare. It just tends to pay more. And they're so keen on pushing out material, pushing out adverts, images, and they try and get people to watch movies. If you move up to this passive engagement, you can get up to about a 40% memory recall, but at the bottom, if they're just reading the information, you'll tend to get a 10% recall. If you get them to participate in a discussion, if you simulate a real experience for them and personalize that, that's where you can get about a 90% recall of the information. So from an advertising perspective, AI and personalization, this is the theory behind why it can actually have a massive impact in terms of what we're doing. And one of the biggest challenges you have in an advertising agency is to try and move them away from what they've currently done in the past to try and personalize it, to try and make them think beyond what they're trying to do. Which leads me to Gestalt psychology, which is basically people tend to create categories in their own mind and group everything together. So you just looking at this picture here, instantly your attention goes to this little coloured fella here, as opposed to the rest. Your mind actually gives yourself, if you stand out from the crowd, gives you a significantly more share of attention and memory recall and impact if you stand out. So one of the challenges you have within AI is to try and create this innovation to stand out. And this is the problem you get in a lot of advertising. Something will be successful, and every other brand will copy it. And by copying it, you're just one of these extra black characters in here and not within a different category. So your challenge within an advertising agency is to stand out, to create your own new category of engagement. Your mind's constantly trying to solve problems. So this is an actual photo that you've seen before. When you look at that, you realize something's not quite right, and it makes you pay more attention to it. So knowing how the mind works, looking at, it's always trying to solve problems, making your adverts stand out is really critical for making people give a little bit more attention than they used to for adverts. And you've got more chance of your material to be becoming effective. So if we look at an everyday solution here, you're trying to influence people to do stuff in marketing and advertising. If I ask most people how they choose their wine on a wine list, this is a typical wine list. Most people looking at that wine list would have no clue about all the wines. They might recognize a grape if it mentions it, or a country, but most people will not have any experience about which one's best. So they're making an imperfect decision, and most people, when they're presented with this, wouldn't go for the cheapest. They don't want to be seen as too cheap. They'll probably go down for the second one, which thinks, oh, I'm not too cheap, I'll probably go there. Interestingly enough, if you were to flip that list around, exactly the same list, but you're starting off with the most expensive one first, you instantly change how someone reacts to making that choice. So you can start to influence, through choice architecture, the decisions people make to try and get them to buy more. When this happens, they're anchored at a higher price, which is a cognitive bias, and they will tend to go more middling in terms of their price, and they'll end up spending more as a customer, just through layout and through design. So it's not necessarily, does it look cool, which is what you'll look at from an advertising point of view. It's how you actually lay things out and how you want people to consume that information is really critical. But some of these rules which you can apply can be embedded into that AI and through disciplined experimentation to increase the effectiveness of what we're trying to do. So again, if you're looking at influencing models, I don't think this is going to come in, and you actually wanted to influence someone to choose, say, the Albarino. If you look at Robert Cialdini's models of influence, I don't know if you're aware of Robert Cialdini and his 6 influence factors, but basically he's narrowed down influence to 6 factors. Applying some of these models to the choice architecture, say authority, actually this one has won all the medals in the area. If you flag that in how you present your information, you influence choice. If you flag the most popular, that's social proofing, which is actually the biggest predictor of behavioural change, flagging out what everyone else is doing, more people are likely to go with the crowd. So that's just an overview of some of the factors that you can apply. But when you apply that to your advertising and your communication, you can dramatically, well, seriously increase the effectiveness of what you're doing, increase sales, and do it in an ethical way so they don't feel influenced. Part of the point of making a decision like this is most people have an imperfect choice. They don't really know what the best choice is. In fact, there's probably no right or wrong choice. So they are looking for external cues to help them make those decisions. So applying these models actually dramatically increases your impact. Okay. which leads us to this disciplined experimentation idea. I think quite a few of you might have seen this picture before. This looks at eye tracking, so how people actually consume your adverts. You'll notice that lots of attention here, and people actually skim read most of the time. So a lot of the time people design ads because it looks cool. They think that looks really good. And in some of the industries I've worked in, like healthcare, they struggle to get one piece of content out, let alone another piece. If you were just to change the picture here, what impact will that have on how people consume that content? You'll notice, just changing the picture, from a behavioural science point of view, people are intrigued by other people, so they'll automatically look at eyes first. And then there's this inquisitive nature about, well, what are they looking at? So they'll always look at where they're looking at. So you can actually completely change how your adverts, your material is consumed to have maximum impact to get the brand stories that you want delivered. And if you've aligned it to the influence factors, you can dramatically increase the effectiveness of your advertising. It's amazing, just one small change can change how much they consume and what they consume. Okay, almost over for my time. So I've covered a lot today. There are quite a lot of models that you can actually apply and think when you're thinking about delivery and excellence. But most agencies that I've worked in have a brief from a client. They're trying to deliver it as creatively to stand out as possible. And actually, they don't really know what good looks like. They don't know what models they can apply. But there are models available in here. So actually, first of all, mapping the behavioural change you want. Often the brief you're getting from a client is quite vague, and actually helping the client understand the behavioural changes that they're trying to create. And when you overlay the brand stories that they're trying to get across, to see whether it's aligned. One brand I worked with, when we did a behavioural mapping exercise, and we took the global brand messaging and brand stories and applied it to it, it sold the competitor. Because there's often a mismatch. There's models for sharing, there's models to increase memory, there's gamification models to improve the engagement with what you're trying to do. There's consumability models to make sure that people consume the stuff in a more effective way. There's influence models, there's different change management models you can do, and you can look at the motivation for that change as well. So here's a few that you can apply to your advertising, your marketing, and often all these models, if applied to AI, because these are constructs that are available you can look into, so applying that through in a consistent way. So what are the key take-home 4 points that I'm going to leave you with is, one is set your behavioural objectives to your advertising, to your campaigns, whatever you're trying to do. Understand what you want your customers to believe and do differently, and then it gives you a point to track and monitor. Because when you look at effectiveness of what you're trying to do, it's not necessarily just about recall, it's about impact on that behavioural change. Then you can start to plan the choice architecture that you want. How can I influence that decision? What's the models I can apply? How can I do things in a different way? Then you sort of set up experiments. Do A/B testing, multivariate testing, to try and see what the optimal approach is. Then you can evaluate, learn, and reconfigure. All of those models there apply perfectly to AI as a model. So applying that through all the technologies that are coming along and you'll hear about today can dramatically increase the effectiveness of your campaign model. Thank you.